Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, dear student. Dear student, today we are discussing about the section 3 elements, chapter 1. The objectives of today's lessons are related to the topic that are related to the metals. We will discuss about metals and non-metals. But before going to discuss this one, let me rewind the last lecture, last topic. It was related to the groups and period. As we discussed in our last video that the elements in periodic tables are arranged into groups and periods. Now, the vertical columns in the periodic tables are known as groups. As I told you that there are 18 groups in periodic table. While in the same groups, each group contains elements with same chemical properties, means their chemical properties will be same. We already discussed this one. While the horizontal rows of the elements in the periodic tables are called periods, and physical and the chemical properties change somewhat regularly across a period. And there are 7 periods in periodic table. Now, dear student, the elements in the periodic table are classified into metals and non-metals. Also, there is one more term, that is metalloid. We will discuss it at the end of the section. So today we will discuss only about the metals and non-metals. Now just look into this one. A metal is an element that is good electrical conductor and good heat conductor. Now, if you look into this periodic table, the elements that are shaded with the pink color over here, all these are metal. If you look over here, it starts from the group 1, also the lanthanide and actinide series, and from here polonium, bismuth, tin, gallium, and aluminum. Up to here, all these are metal. So the very first property of the metal is that the metals conduct electricity. Metals conduct heat. It means that the electricity can pass through the metals. The heat can pass through the metals. This is the first property. The second property is that most of the metals are solids at room temperature. It means that all of these metals are solid in room temperature except one, that is mercury, this one, Hg, mercury. This is the only metal it exists in liquid state at room temperature, while the rest of the elements exist in solid state. And the next property is related to malleable and ductile. So what is malleable, what is ductile? Let me give you a graphical representation over here. If you look over here, this is a glass and filled with water. A glass is non-metal. So when we are going to put it down, what will happen? It breaks into pieces now. So we can say that a glass is brittle. It converts into pieces. While in case of these liquid metals, we can say that the metals are malleable. Metals are malleable and ductile. Now, dear student, as I told you that metals are malleable and ductile, what does it mean now? Malleable means that if we have a piece of iron, a piece of aluminum, both are metal. When the metals are hammered, it converts into a thin sheet. The thin sheet is represented in front of you over here. This process is known as malleability. It's mentioned over here, malleability. While when the same metals are drawn into thin wire, we call it ductility. So now these are the two properties related to metals. While if we have a glass and we want to hammer it, it will never convert into a thin sheet. It will break down into pieces. We call that non-metals are brittle, while metals are malleable and ductile. So it is clear to you people now. Dear students, look into this one. We have 4 examples over here. The very first example is aluminium, that is metal. Copper is a metal. Sulfur is a non-metal. Charcoal is a non-metal. When these are being hammered, when we are going to take aluminium and when we are going to hammer it, it converts into sheet. Look, it's just going to shrink and it is going to convert into sheets. So aluminium is malleable. While we are going to take copper, and when we are going to hammer it, what will happen? It again shrinks, it converts into a thin sheet at the end. So it means that aluminium and copper is malleable, while sulfur, look into this case, it's a non-metal. It is in solid state. When we are going to heat it, it converts into powder now. So it is brittle. It is not malleable. It is not ductile. So in case of charcoal, it has the same property. Charcoal is made up of carbon, non-metal. It converts into powder. So it is non-malleable. So clearly mentioned that aluminium and copper, they are malleable, while the non-metals, that is sulfur and charcoal, are brittle. They are brittle. Now look into this one. Next example is related to ductility. As I told you in terms of ductility, that when the metals they are drawn, it converts into a wire. We call it ductility. Look now, when this aluminium, when a piece of aluminium is, look over here now, this is a piece of aluminium. When they are going to push this one in small holes, it's going to convert into wire now. This is the property of metal, while the non-metals, they don't have such a kind of properties. Like the copper is, again, when we are going to stretch it, it converts into a thin wire now. While in case of this one, look, the sulfur, it's not possible to stretch sulfur because it is a non-metal now. So we discussed about all these parts over here, and I told you that aluminium and copper are metals. They can be beaten into sheets. We call it malleable, and they're drawn into wires. We call this process as a malleability, ductility. Now, examples are in front of you. Also, let me tell you about the non-metals. That the non-metals are the poor conductor of heat and electricity. So we call it non-metal. The non-metals are brittle. Many of the non-metals are gaseous in state. Which are the non-metals? Look, all of these are non-metal. These exist in the gaseous state. Fluorine, oxygen, nitrogen, all these exist in gaseous state. While there's one a non-metal, that is bromine, over here it exists in liquid state. Also carbon. Carbon exists in solid state, like charcoal, like diamond. These are the pure carbon. These are exist in solid state also. This is all about today's lesson, dear student. Hope you understand each and every part over here. Again, I'm going to remind you that if you're facing any sort of trouble in today's lesson, you can ask question in Schoology discussion forum. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, dear student.